We are live. I am so excited to be doing this live tonight. I can't even tell you. I am so excited to be doing this live. It's been something that's been like sitting on my head, and I've been like, yay, we're gonna get on live tonight and we're gonna talk about this. So in the summer, backstory, I know I should wait for everyone to join. Okay, I'll wait. So many amazing people here tonight. I'm so excited. Am I going to save the live? Have you been here long enough to know how many bad stories I have with my lives not saving? But I will certainly try to save the live. Let's put it that way. I'm gonna try very hard to save the live. Okay. So, thank you for all your kind words. Let me get right into this. Let me tell you what sparked this whole topic tonight, which is, and if somebody could type this for me, that would be great, so I'll pin it, which is understanding how to give to somebody else using, and to be helpful. I guess I'll type it soon, to somebody else using the 5 love language model. So basically what happened in the summer, I don't know how many of you saw this when I was posting it, was my former student, who is Rivkah Wigs. So she called me in the middle of the summer and she said, would you come? Thank you. Abigail, you're a doll. I'm going to pin that comment. Okay. So my former student, she was a 5th grader when I taught her, Rivkah Schwartz. So she asked me to come to her bungalow colony in the summer to speak to some of the women there who were some of my former students. And I told her, I said, I have this idea in my head that I've been wanting to share for a while. And I said to her, basically, here's what it is in its very raw version. I hear from so many people, I'm doing so much for my sister who's a widow. I'm doing so much for my daughter-in-law who lost her mother. I'm doing so much for this child in my life, whatever it is, right? And yet they're feeling like I'm not doing enough. I'm not here for them. I'm not able to be helpful to them. And they're always frustrated with me and, stuff of that sort. And there's a lot of this hurt on both sides. The hurt on the giver's side is like, I do so much and nothing's appreciated, right? And then the hurt, obviously, on the recipient side is that nobody really knows what's important to me. And, years back, I read Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages. And for those of you who are familiar, I'm just curious, you can type here if you're familiar, but for those of you who are familiar with the book, then what I'm saying right now, the first piece of it won't be new to you, but then you'll see which direction I'm going to take it, which I think is refreshingly new to myself and hopefully will be helpful to others as well. But basically, Gary Chapman was a pastor, I believe he still is, and he was counseling couples in that capacity. And what he found fascinating is he'd sit with 2 fairly good human beings who would look at each other and they'd say, I don't understand, but I always pay the bills, the husband would say, and I'd always make sure that everything is taken care of, and she's never had to worry about money and stuff like that. Why is she upset with me, right? And the woman would say, it's amazing. He comes home and he worked all day and I worked all day in the house, and all I want is to spend some time with him, and he won't spend time with me, and he doesn't really love me, and I don't really love him, right? And so based off of that, Gary was extremely troubled by this, Gary Chapman, and what he sat and kind of studied and sort of created an idea based off of that was the 5 love languages, where he basically said, what's happening here? There are 2 really good people doing really nice things, except you're doing what works and feels nice for you, and you're doing what feels nice for you, but you don't get that the feelings of feeling loved by another person works on what their language is, to use those words. And therefore he came up with these 5 love languages, with 5 languages that people tend to give and receive love in. And just to recap really fast, in his view, they are words of affirmation, quality time, gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. Okay? All that. Now, What hit me all of a sudden this summer was as I was thinking about the 5 love languages, and I was thinking about the escalating frustration that I was hearing from people who were struggling with all sorts of things. And the frustration that people who were doing for them were feeling. All of a sudden it hit me that this is what's going on, right? We have people who are giving and genuinely want to be there for another person in their pain. And we have people who are feeling in pain and are saying, you're giving me in a way that works for you, but that's not what I need for me, right? So basically what's happening is, let's say you are a neighbor who would love that when you're in pain and stuff like that, somebody would buy you chocolate, cook you dinner, do something like that. So what are you doing for your neighbor who's struggling? Naturally, we'll go to what feels good, right? And we'll say, well, supper feels good. Chocolate feels good. And so we'll do that for the next person. And if you're following what I'm bringing up, then you're going to realize one thing, and that is maybe that person doesn't like chocolate. Maybe that person is not interested in meals. Maybe what that person needs is just a text in the morning saying, I'm just thinking about you, right? And you say to yourself, well, who do they think I'm thinking of when I cook them dinner? Who do they think I'm thinking of when I buy the chocolate? I mean, who, really, right? But essentially, we all have languages of how we hear people. We all have languages of how we give to people. And when the two work, what's incredible about that is sometimes you have to work less hard. And sometimes you have to work, differently. But your act of giving is meaningful to the recipient and is something that recipient now can actually heal using the type of giving you're giving. You following me? Like, am I making any sense to you guys? Give me the feedback, because I've only done this in person so far, this thought process. So just let me know whether it's by shooting some hearts or just give me the feedback. Ask any questions, say you're making no sense, you're talking nonsense, or it is making sense to me. I relate to this, right? Good, I'm seeing a thumbs up, I'm seeing some hearts. Because this is weird. I gotta tell you, when you have, in person, or when you have Zooms and you have, oh, Randy, thank you. When you have an Instagram Live and I'm like, am I not making sense to people? Okay, I'm making so much sense. Good, fine. So then you're following me. Then you're all smart, right? Because I've got to make sense. Anyway, that was a joke in case you didn't understand. All right. Let's go to now the next piece. Okay. So now if we're going to give the griever, and I'm just using the example as the griever, but really I want you to know that this is true for anything in your life. Like if there's someone struggling with any type of struggle, or in an opposite sense, if somebody is having a great time and they're getting married or they're having a baby and they're having some wonderful milestone in their life, this could still be helpful in that space, because what we want to learn is, how do we gift another human being in a way that is appreciated? How do we give to another person in a way that that person now feels given to, right? Because I think there's nothing more frustrating to all of us as human beings, and I've certainly been there myself, is when you feel I've twisted myself into a pretzel for this human being, and I can't believe how ungrateful she is or he is. Or I've given everything, and she's telling people that I'm not helpful? Are you kidding me? So let's break down how that really happens and how we can change that. Because it's actually not super difficult. And then I'm going to flip the switch. And what I'm going to do when I flip that switch is that I'm going to ask you, how do we let other people know what we actually need when we need it, and get them to give us what we need? Okay? So hang in there with me. We're going to have fun here. So basically, let's start with the first piece, right? How do we get to know what it is that the other person wants? Sometimes people aren't so communicative, particularly, and I'm going to go back to the example of grief. When somebody is really immersed in their grief, and I think this was the best line I picked up at the Our House grief training a few years ago. they said asking them, what can I do for you, is giving the griever another job. And I thought that was such a great line, because so often that's what happens, right? You're down and out. Let's just even use the example, you have the flu and you're in bed. And somebody says, what can I do for you? And through that pounding headache, you're like, oh, let me come up quickly with something they could do for me so they don't feel bad, right? And it's like, you've just given the person who's struggling another job. They've got to come up now with something for you to do, right? So what we want to see is, how can we make this really easy, right? So asking that griever, asking that person who's struggling, what can I do for you? Let's shelve that for a second, right? Although it would be really nice if you ask that and they can actually have an answer for you. That's the easy way, right? Because then you know what to do. But there are a few other ways. So if this is somebody that you have a close relationship with, let's say this is somebody who is within your family. Let's say this is somebody who you have a very close friendship with. Let's say this is somebody, let's take the idea of somebody you know for a really long time, or you know them, right? Then I want you to think about what that person did for you last or has done for others. Is this the person always organizing meals? Is this the person who always goes out and buys that little gift with that perfect magnet with that quote, right? Is this the person who always is sending you a text saying, I just want you to know I'm thinking about you, hope the surgery today goes well, right? Is that the type of person? Is this the type of person who leaves a note at the door with just saying, again, just something nice? Is this the person who says, let's go out to eat because I know that stuff has been hard for you? Is this the person who says, come on, let's have a conversation about this. I can listen, you can talk, right? I want you to think about what this person's go-to is. That's likely what their language is, right? If this is a person, because let's think about ourselves, right? What's our natural go-to? What do we think, right? What do I want, right? And then most likely, that's where the person's own language is. And that's when you want to be able to give to that person. That's probably what that person needs. Okay, so that's one way. And that's the easiest way. That when you have someone who is in pain, and you can think about what they've done for others in other circumstances, both good and bad, that's probably what they're going to appreciate, because we naturally go to what our go-to language is. Okay, so that's just one idea. But now let's go to two other caveats with that. So there's a lot of debate out there in the world of just like people saying, just inform, right? Because we said asking a griever, like, what can I do for you, is giving them another job, right? So a lot of people, and I know certainly a lot of has been written around this, is just tell the griever, I'll be dropping dinner off tonight at your door. Okay? I'm going to say something personally, this always bothered me. And the reason for that is because I need a space in my most vulnerable place to still feel like I'm a human being with a choice. Maybe I don't like your dinner. Maybe I don't want dinner tonight. Maybe 3 other people are sending me dinner. And I don't want to feel like I'm just misusing all of you, right? I like to do this a little bit differently, where I'll say, I'd like to drop off dinner for you tonight. Is that okay? Just and accept if the person says, thank you for thinking of me, but I don't need tonight. Thank you. And then you can just follow up with a gentle, is it okay if I send dinner tomorrow night? Does that work for you? Or would you prefer lunch? Or would you prefer, right? You can reframe it in a different way. But I like to still give people, particularly people who are either grieving or struggling in some form, I want to still give them the power of choice, right? Because we're human beings. I think that grieving or not, pained or not, we should all be entitled to be allowed to make a choice when so many choices are taken away from us. So I definitely suggest saying it, not asking the griever, what would you like? I agree with that. I think that that's giving them another job. But if we're going to say, okay, I'll be dropping off dinner. Okay, I'll be available to take the kids out tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to be dropping off this, right? If it's something like that, I still want to ask, is it okay? I'll tell you where you don't have to ask that. Obviously, if you're doing something that doesn't require anything, like if you're just checking in and you're just sending a text saying no response needed, but just wanting you to know I'm thinking about you, you genuinely have to be okay with the no response needed, because many grievers and many people in pain will not respond to you, right? But we want to be able to let the person know that we're feeling for them. So again, just to recap till here, and then we're going to zoom through the next piece, is that using the concept of the 5 love languages, where each of us gives and receives in our own unique way, then what we want to do is be able to observe, what does another person do when somebody else is struggling? What does person A do for other people? That's most likely what person A wants. Okay? And that's if we're close enough. Now, what happens if it's a neighbor who just moved in? You don't really know her. Or it's not somebody who you have a super close relationship with before, but circumstances have put you together for some reason, right? So this is where I also want to caution you. There's a lot of talk about people feeling forgotten and feeling alone. And to overcompensate for that, we sometimes have a community of giving, which is beautiful. At the same time, sometimes people feel like, I don't really know you, and I feel a little overwhelmed by this intrusion in my space suddenly by a bunch of strangers. So you want to be mindful that the kind of giving that you give to a person who is not in your close circle of people, right? But like I said, is the neighbor down the block that you heard about, should be something that is kind of appropriate for the nature of the relationship. So for instance, somebody said, should I go be Menachem Avel? Should I go pay a Shiva call to somebody who lives down the block, who I've seen sporadically when we've waited for the bus together, but that's about it. So it depends. It really depends on the kind of nature you have, right? But if you're gonna go, then go like a stranger would, right? Be appropriate in that sense. Okay, now what I want to go to is 2 things. What about us? What about when we're in pain and we need things and other people are just doing it all wrong? They really are. And has this ever happened to anybody here? Or am I the only crazy person who's experienced this in my life, right? I want to say that I'm probably not. But, so often we are in a lot of pain and we have expectations of people. And those people let us down. And I think that's a fair thing to say, is that more often than not in my DMs, I will hear about people who are very frustrated with their nearest and dearest for not getting them and for not understanding them and for not doing what they need and for not giving them the support. And I think there's nothing more lonely than that experience where you're vulnerable, you're in this down and out place and you feel like somebody can't give me what I need. And then sometimes people feel like, and I have to grovel and beg for it? Is that what you're going to tell me? Somebody DM'd me the other day and said, do I actually need to beg for what I want? Is there a better way? So thank you to some of you who are posting that this is also you. Okay, so then I'm normal. I'm in good company. And I think that part of what makes it hard to ask is 2 things. Number 1 is we don't always have a very definite idea of what we want. In the same way that I said, when you ask a griever, what can I do for you? You're giving them another job. It truly is like that, which means that sometimes even asking ourselves that question gets really hard. It really does. Because we all of a sudden have to dig deep and start to explore, what do I want? And do I want it coming from this person? Oh, that's asking for too much, right? All the voices in our heads. We do interesting things to ourselves, right? Okay. So Having said that, here's what I think we could do. So yeah, there's the simple thing that if you feel up to it, and if you can, and if it's the right person, then expressing to them what it is that you need may get you what you need, which is like, wow, genius. Having said that, I'll tell you where you take a lot of risk. You take risk with someone who has failed you before in this, where you've been vulnerable and you've been able to share that this is what I want and they haven't been able to come through. There's nothing more painful than that. I just had this where somebody expressed what they needed from me, and due to certain circumstances in my life, I completely dropped the ball on this one, and I forgot. And I let them down, and I don't think there was more pain that I could have caused than that, right? But if somebody has that as a habit of letting you down, it might not be a great idea to share with them what you want because you're asking to be let down, right? It's more hurt. But suppose you have a person who has a fair chance of doing what you ask, then certainly being able to be vulnerable and share, this is what would mean something to me. And sometimes we don't have to come up with that specific thing, but just say, you know what? Yard site is coming up. I really have a hard day. I need to figure out a way that I have a quiet day. So whether that's you getting out, whether it's that other people need to get out of your way, whether it's that you need to take the day off from work, whatever, right? But if you're able to communicate what it is that you need without necessarily specifying how that need should be fulfilled, you can leave something up to another person with some risk. Then you're fine. But if you're not going to communicate at all what your needs are, then yes, you're going to be left a little bit up for the guessing game unless people listen to this live and then they got really smart and they started noticing what do you do for other people, and they say, that's probably what she wants. But there is another way. There is another way. And it's a little bit nuanced from what we said before. It's kind of similar in some ways, but a little bit different. And that's kind of roping in a third party prior. This doesn't work in crisis, but this does work with circumstances that you know going forward. So suppose you were to share with someone in your neighborhood or in the place that you work that you find that when you have hard times, this is what you'd love if people would do for you. And could they just kind of let that message trickle out to the others? And the reason that's sometimes helpful is that sometimes we feel safe with one person, but there is a group vibe that we need to have. And so this could be helpful sometimes in setting that up. But now, what if I really don't know what I need? And there have been many times in my life where there's so much clutter in my brain, right? Where I'm just like, I don't know what I need. Do you guys know what you need all the time? I'm just curious. And I'm just scrolling up. I saw some great comments. Yeah. How do you feel about your own needs? Are you very well self-aware? Do you feel like most of the time you know what you need? I wish I could put up polls here. Just get an idea of what you feel about this. In terms of how much you feel you're connected with your own self and knowing what you want and what you need. So I found it's an exploratory journey, and it changes with circumstance. It changes with time. It changes with age. Somebody wrote here, I feel like my family checks in with me. However, I feel like all my friends don't realize that the grief is a lifetime. Yes, and they don't ask how I'm doing. I feel like the topic is taboo for most of them. It's hard because part of what I do on this page, part of the awareness that we've tried to create here is that grief is a lifelong process. I think society at large still sees grief as something we get over, right? We're done with, apparently. At some point in time, we're supposed to check this off, this grieving thing off our checklist. And it doesn't. It really comes in waves. And it's here and it comes and it goes, and sometimes it's worse and sometimes it's better. But I think that one of the things that we will get understanding from some people more than others. There's nothing to talk about in terms of that. And I think to the person who raised that, I think bringing up with even one friend about the fact that you need this to become less taboo for them, maybe they can do it. Maybe they can't, right? But I find going back to learning what our own language is. So Gary Chapman actually has some great quizzes online that you can take on the 5 love languages, so you can learn a language, and it's very similar to the gifting language. But I want to just give one example that came up when I did this live in person, and I thought that it was so profound. Somebody said that she's gifted with the most beautiful, beautiful flowers every time on her birthday, and it means nothing to her. She would so prefer if her friends would call her up and say, we're going to meet up for coffee. Or if at least the flowers would come with a note, right? And this, I asked her, I said, I'm just curious, have you ever brought this up with your friends? And she said something fascinating. She says, it took me 5 years to recognize why I felt so hurt every time I got those flowers. Like there was something that didn't sit well with me, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And this is, I think, something just for all of us to have an awareness of. Sometimes we blame other people for not getting us and not doing the right thing to us and not supporting us in the way. And I'm here to create all the awareness that I can of, people being sensitive and knowing what to do and stuff like that. And there is this other piece that says to me, if I don't know what I want, how do I think somebody else will know? Right? Should think about that for a second. So I think if I had to start with where the homework starts, it's in getting to know ourselves and our giving patterns and our receiving patterns and what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And then the other part is that start observing around you. Start observing. How is it? What is it that people do when they give to others? What is it that they're looking out for? What are the details that they care about? That is most likely what they care about. And that's most likely what they want. So that's, my general philosophy on gifting and giving someone, using what works for them, using their own love language, using what's important to them, not necessarily because they verbalized it, but because we're able to observe and watch and see what is it that we find that's important to them. So I'm just curious if anyone has any questions before we end this live, any questions, any comments, any feedback, anything that resonated with you, didn't resonate, makes sense, doesn't make sense. Come on, you can give me all the feedback now, because I'm genuinely curious to hear from you as to what matters to you when it comes to these things. What's important to you? What do you feel? In terms of all this. And after that, you agree with everything that's been said? Can you come also just agree with everything I say all day? It would be so nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. And if there's anybody who disagrees, you can feel free to disagree as well. Or if there's something that wasn't clear, or if you want a question on it, or anything follow up, just curious if there's anything here. Otherwise, we will end this live shortly. Oh, resonated so much. I'm so happy to hear that. And is there anyone else who wants to share anything before we end this live? This was really terrific. You were a great audience, quiet the whole time. But otherwise, really, if we just think about it this way, then it will really, I think, open up our ability to help other people. Oh, I'm so glad. And I love that you said resonated with almost everything. You're going to DM me later and tell me what didn't resonate, because I want to find through this. I try to text my grieving friends thinking of you once a week. That's great. You know what? And if that works for them and it works for you, that's wonderful. You know that somebody said to me, can't disagree with the truth, thank you. Somebody said to me actually that she's still getting texts from somebody, and it's years after loss. To somebody who can keep up with that kind of discipline, I'm a person who can barely take 10 days of medication when I have strep. My doctors know that I should be on a 5-day course because I don't know how to finish those things. So for me, doing this, committing to this for years would be impossible, which is also another thing, by the way. We need to know our limitations and our capabilities. So true that grief is a lifetime. It really is. And that's why checking in with people is so important, because forget about the checking in piece, but more than that, it's about telling the person, you're sending a very strong message of like, I get it. I get that it's not done for you. That even if the whole world says, oh, it's over. Oh, you should be over it. Which I never figured out what that means. Like, the person didn't come back from the dead, did they? So like, what part is supposed to be over? But yeah, I think other than that, it's something that we send such a strong message to the person of like, I still get it. I still get that you're in pain. This was a great live. It was so nice to be here. I forgot how much fun lives are. We got to do this more often. And I'm looking forward to getting your feedback. You can always DM me. I'm pretty good about responding. And if I don't respond, then nudge me again, because that means that Instagram lost your message. Have a great night, everyone.